Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is a recording of a talk that I gave some years back called Transforming Our Way of Being. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. All praise is due to the one that has brought us here today to remember him, and in remembering him we might remember ourselves, and salutations and blessings to the noble messenger who bore the weight of the message, and to his purified progeny who bore the trials of transmitting it. May we be blessed to meet them at the pool of Kawthar. The topic today is transforming our way of being. Before I go into this, I wanted to explain a little about what I mean by the term way of being. We could say that it is a mode of existing in the world, a way of approaching reality and living with reality. A way of being is also a mentality, and that mentality is rooted in a perception of reality. We know that Muslims are all seeking to defend and elevate the Islamic way of life, and also seeking some kind of inner transformation in order to transcend the mundane, materialistic, secular way of life in which we find ourselves. The way of being which Islam opens up is largely based upon a clear awareness of the transience of this life and of the close proximity of death. We are encouraged to remember death often, since the remembrance of death, that which cuts down all human beings, whether great or humble, acts as a reminder of the truth that we are inevitably going to face. Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam said, "Contemplating death kills desire, cuts off the root of heedlessness, and strengthens the heart with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's promise of life hereafter." He also said, "Death is the first station of the next world and the last station of this world." Do we have time in this day and age not only to remember death, but to live in close proximity to death? Those pure mu'mineen of the early days of Islam not only remembered death, but took death as a close friend, for in embracing death before death embraced them, they were already able to begin to pass to the next world, and to move more closely to the one absolute reality, the truth, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The pure Islamic way of being, then, is a way of being that is rooted in the unseen world, which we will encounter after we leave this world. The mu'min is close to the unseen, is permanently turned to the unseen, aware of it, interacts with it, and receives intimations in the heart and instructions from it. As the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, has said, "Be in the world, but not of it." If we are not of the world, then what are we of? We are of a purer place where we existed in a state of plenitude, tranquility and light, in a state of knowledge of ourselves, and in a state of knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That was our state before we were sent here as human beings, to undergo a process of initiation through this experience of earthly existence. For the mu'min, knowledge of death, and by extension knowledge of the unseen realms, is of the utmost priority, for it is in turning towards death and embracing death, mentally and spiritually, that the mu'min is able to come close to the one reality, the truth. A secular way of life, which is the basis for a secular way of being, generally ignores momentous realities in the life of a human being, such as birth and death, whereas Islam contains knowledge of this world and higher spiritual worlds beyond this one, ultimately meeting an infinite, unlimited, incomprehensible reality. Secular life, on the other hand, limits us to what we see in front of us, this world and the things of this world and the concerns of this world, to the exclusion of anything else. The importance of the transient things of this world is magnified, while the importance of the reality that we shall meet upon death is minimized. A secular way of life traps the mu'min in a limited, finite space. The mentality that accompanies a secular way of life is one that does not see beyond this limited, finite space. Muslims living in a secular environment where the influence of a deeper way of life is kept at bay by a million distractions are susceptible to the same mental and psychic forces of that environment as anyone else. Muslims learn from and adapt to the environment in which they live. And this is why there are many Muslims for whom death is something abstract, in that they cannot feel its presence in their lives, and therefore they are left less conscious of the meaning of this short life. Rather, just like everybody else, Muslims are kept from a close relationship with death by a million distractions, and are in danger of being exiled on the surface of reality. We know that the Quran talks about remembrance of the home, or remembrance of the abode, which can be interpreted either as the akhirah, the afterlife, or proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remembrance of the home enables us to see beyond the surface of the reality of this world. The Urafa talk about being in a state of exile. This is an existential state which cannot be shaken off. It is a consciousness of the world not being the home. The surface of the reality of this material realm prevents the mu'min from penetrating to the heart of being, where the heart of the mu'min would be able to perceive something of the reality of being directly. Thus, if we wish to have a true Islamic way of being, the first thing that we need to do, as the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam have said, is to detach oneself from this world. This detachment is not necessarily a physical detachment. Rather, it is an internal, mental and spiritual detachment. We remember that Imam Hussein alayhi salam embraced the suffering that he knew was going to happen to him. He knew that it was a necessary part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plan. And Imam Bakr alayhi salam has also said that the tragedies that befell the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam were sent in order that they might fulfill the high status that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wished to grant them. As he said, that which befell them was not because of wrongdoing which they had committed, not as a punishment for disobedience in which they had disobeyed Allah, but it was for stages and honor from Allah which he wished them to reach. Likewise, while the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam and those coming after them were grateful and gave thanks for the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they did not exult in them or revel in them, but retained an awareness that these are passing. In order to undergo transformation, to shed the limiting mental trappings of the world, we need to remember what it is to be a human being with a heart, since it is the heart that connects to the essence of existence, and in doing so connects to outpouring, the faidah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy and compassion. Surrendering to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means allowing His mercy and compassion to flow through the heart. Morality that does not come as a result of this mercy and compassion is an empty morality, which is close to hypocrisy. As the Quran says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only accepts the Muslim who comes with a sound heart. Qalbin Salim, chapter 26, verses 88 to 89. The heart, therefore, is of central importance to Islam, and we will not be accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if we do not pay attention to it. In turning the attention away from the distractions of the world, we turn inward towards the heart. In this heart is a universe, a vast world in which the signs and attributes of Allah are reflected. But we can only begin to explore this universe and understand these signs and attributes if we keep the heart free of pollution and corruption. If our hearts have been hardened through neglect, the universe within it, with all its constellations, begins to fade. The universe within us begins to darken, and we end up being locked out of ourselves. One of the major reasons for restlessness, dissatisfaction, unhappiness, being lost in the world, being confused, is through not connecting to the heart and finding out who we ourselves are. It is through allowing the heart to become sealed, so that we are exiled on the surface of ourselves, unable any longer to go within. We are left just with the shallow persona, the persona that the world sees, and which the world will easily chuck away like a piece of rubbish should we fall on hard times. As the Quran says, it is not the eyes that are blind, rather it is the hearts. Chapter 22, verse 46. This blindness of the heart is the rust that covers it through neglect. Not only is it blind to the signs of Allah, it is blind to the reality of His presence, which we can only feel if we are close to the unseen world, where His wisdom, mercy and compassion can be perceived more fully, free from the veils of the material world. As Imam Ali alayhi salam said, Al-yaqeen afdal min al-Islam. Yaqeen is superior to Islam. Yaqeen is the state where the heart perceives the presence of Allah and the reality of the spiritual worlds clearly and directly. The Holy Prophet, peace be upon him and his holy progeny, is known to have praised a believer who was witnessed in this state of being. It is described in the sources in slightly literal terms. This is where one of the companions named Harith is seen coming from the Fajr prayer. The Holy Prophet asked him, "How did you pass the night?" He replied, "I passed the night with certitude." The Holy Prophet asked for his signs of certitude. He replied, "I have turned away from the world and everything in it. This has gone so far that I can see my Lord's throne set up for reckoning. All the people have been resurrected for reckoning, and I am among them, and can see the residence of heaven filled with blessings, and I can see the residents of hell being tortured in fire and crying out." You may have heard the expression, "die before you die." Those who have reached the level of ma'rifah, direct knowledge of the light of Allah's presence, say that the mu'min already experiences a resurrection in this life. The mu'min undergoes a spiritual death and is raised again in a state of perfect nearness to Allah. But undergoing this spiritual death is by no means easy. It is one of the most difficult trials of the human being, for many reasons. Firstly, because it requires absolute ikhlas, pure sincerity of heart in seeking knowledge of Him. This means that it requires us to be absolutely honest with ourselves, let's even say ruthlessly honest, and to be prepared to face all the most deeply hidden shadows within ourselves, which we prefer to conceal from the outside world. In addition to facing our own inner shadows, the less pleasant parts of our souls which deviate us from the pure path to Allah, we also need to be able to bear the intense trials and pressures which He places upon us. For when we decide to return to Him voluntarily, to seek nearness to Him, He sets out training us and raising our spiritual station by putting these trials in our path. In addition to these trials is the test of whether we can trust Him enough to bear them, and whether we can trust enough, deep down in our hearts, that He is not being unjust, but rather He is doing what is necessary for us to grow as human beings. He is burning out the complacency in our hearts with His searing light. He is crushing our egotism by withholding us from that which the heart craves. Yet at the same time He extends His mercy to us, in order that we may rely on Him in getting through these trials. As the Quran says, everything turns to Him, willingly or unwillingly. Chapter 3, verse 83. The Masters of Knowledge say that the people of Ma'rifah are those who return to Allah willingly. Qalb, as we know, means turning. It is in turning the qalb to Allah that we begin the voluntary journey back to Him. This is the real journey, not the journey of getting older year by year, working, being with family, traveling, experiencing joys and sorrows, gains and losses. The real journey is when we begin to make a conscious decision to turn to Him fully. In turning to Him fully, we begin the process of surrendering to Him fully, of becoming real Muslims in the deepest sense. In turning to Him, we turn away from those parts of ourselves that cling to the world in the hope and belief that we can somehow benefit from them. All benefit is from Allah. Therefore, we need to tear ourselves away from putting hope and trust in the world in order to put pure hope and trust only in Him. This tearing away from the world is not easy and can be a painful process, but if we can manage it, then we can begin to experience the beauty of reliance on Him and taste something of true liberation and true freedom. In being in a state of true liberation and true freedom, we can begin to be who we really are, and in becoming who we really are, we return once again to that state of plenitude, tranquility and light, basking in a state of pure knowledge of Allah.